This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Welcome back to my in-depth conversation with author and memoirist Mag Dimond. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, please do so. We're going to pick up right where we left off. We were just talking about Homer's Odyssey, and we're about to get into how Meg views the hero's journey as part of life, applicable to each and every one of us. Enjoy the rest of this conversation. It always felt like part of the journey. And you mentioned Homer and the Odyssey, and there's a point in here where you say you've always been fascinated by the hero's journey and viewing life or everyone's lives as a hero's journey. So there's a lens we could maybe apply to your memoir. Would you like to say something about your own hero's journey and maybe how you view it, if you view it differently pre and post writing this book?
Well, yeah, I did have that sense about the hero, that, that people's journeys are, or you could take the frame of the hero concept of the hero's journey. And, that the hero's journey is one where learning has to take place, where lessons have to be learned, where humility has to be discovered. And all these apply to any human life, really. You have people that guide you, which is true in the hero's journey. You have people that oppose you. There are people who present the obstacles to you, the defeats or whatever they are. And sometimes what presents the obstacle is your own self, is your lack of clarity. And so the hero's journey is also one about learning ways to be in the world. That's a big thing with Odysseus. He has to learn how to be, he has to learn how to be other than just a hero, a warrior. He has to learn how to be a man and a husband and a father. He has to understand those things.
Right.
So, I think that it was probably always in my thinking, but as I wrote that stuff out, and brought in that concept, I realized that, the book Ulysses, of course, is totally structured on Homer's Odyssey, and I loved what Joyce did with it, but he created a very vastly different character than Odysseus, right? In Leopold Bloom. But boy, it's got all the same elements. It's got all the same elements. And so think of one's life as a journey, as that you travel through. And you have to pay attention. And that's another thing that's important, is that you have to pay attention to the lessons. And sometimes people go through their experiences and don't learn anything. They keep stumbling over the same thing, or making the same mistake, or choosing the wrong person,
Yes.
And then eventually, you get to a certain point where you feel like you've had a lot of bad luck, but part of it has been that you haven't been paying attention. That's also a big piece of it, right? And a big piece of my life too, like the paying attention to my environment, paying attention to my feelings about, where I am and who I'm with and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Yes. And it seems that, sorry, my dog is sounding an alarm right now. It seems that you have always been that observant and conscientious about recording your observations, your feelings, your sensations through your journals. There's a passage where you talk about the perfection of the egg and the importance and beauty of small things. Is this something innate? Have you always been this way, or is there something you developed and then crafted in order to bring that degree of observation and awareness, consistently through every aspect of your story.
Well, the bringing up the egg thing I'm so glad you did that, because
Oh, good.
I just wrote something about eggs, and I have to confess that I am the inspiration for that little piece that I put in there, and it fit beautifully with the whole Paris experience and being in the cafe with the little soft-boiled eggs. But I was reading MFK Fisher, and she is somebody who has written about food for forever, and done it with lyricism and passion. And I mean, she's just so much the queen of that kind of writing. And she's the one that said this thing about the perfect egg. And I read this essay of hers in one of her books, many books, and I wanted to use it because I love eggs. And when I would go to the cafe and look at the egg in the little cup, and it's sitting there all cute and white and perfect, and so reading this quote of hers about the egg and how intimate the egg is, and then you crack it open, and then it's inside, and then it's revealed to you, and it's a different thing. So the reading of her words was a catalyst for me to kind of develop that little piece in there. But I've always been kind of drawn to form. I mean, like, I once bought a sculpture of a pear that was a quite large ceramic sculpture of the most beautiful pear. And I happened to think the shape of the pear is something I could just look at all the time. It's very feminine to me.
Yes.
And so there's certain shapes that, again, there's other things like smells and sounds and all that we're fond of, but there's shapes that I think we all feel an affinity for. And there's something about the egg. I just love it. And I actually love eating eggs and cooking eggs, and, so, yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's fabulous. There are a few things I definitely want to talk about, but first, would you like to read an excerpt from your memoir?
Sure.
Great.
I read a little bit about Venice, I think, for some reason. I always start with the Florence thing, but I think I'm going to read a little bit about Venice. Want me to read like about 3 pages or something like that?
Sure.
Good?
That sounds good.
The chapter is called Alone in Venice in January. In the dark of night, in the middle of winter of 2013, I pulled my long down coat tightly about me against the Adriatic cold, and I marched onto the Piazza San Marco. I saw not the daylight face of Europe's drawing room, with beautiful women in snazzy shoes, waiters in crisp white jackets, and riots of pigeons and corny string music, but rather an expanse of dark, empty space, at the end of which stood the proud cathedral with its plump cupolas and now invisible mosaics. A few people scurried about far away, and all I could hear was the clacking of my feet on the old stone floor. It was January. I had just arrived in the city this evening, and though jet-lagged from many hours of airplane travel, I wanted to get my first glimpse of Venice in an uncluttered form, without the usual hordes of people who camouflage the dailiness of this city. Though technically a visitor here myself, in my heart I've never felt like one. I guess because I had returned here as many times as I grew into adulthood to walk these alleyways. This particular winter I had come to witness her stripped of travelers, solitary and alone, and to investigate my own aloneness in this barren winter scene. Following the social whirl of holidays with family, I looked forward to meeting my own solitude. And what better place for this than the shuttered down city of merchants and palazzos resting on the murky, shifting waters? When I think of this city, I remember 2 movies whose stories unfold in Venice, Summertime and Death in Venice, in which the central figure looks for a way to warm an empty and lonely heart. Both Jane Hudson and Gustav von Eschenbach take us on a journey of seeing the landscape of Venice and bring to our attention human loneliness and longing. Henry James's Wings of a Dove as well offers up a solitary journey as a mortally ill heroine leaves behind London society in order to find refuge and comfort in Venice's dark palazzos and romantic canals. I seem to carry the voices of writers with me wherever I travel. I've walked down the tortuous calle of this city many times and have seen myself as a character who must wander alone through the maze to find ease. What is peculiar about Venice in winter is how different it is from most other cities in Italy that generously offer up food, hospitality, and cheer, and even romance. Here it is dark gray and cheerless. You don't hear voices or music ringing out, and you don't particularly feel welcome in the little claustrophobic restaurants you visit. Now you can disappear into Venetian life. Feel yourself getting older by the day, slowly aging and sinking with gravity, just as the city recedes into the Adriatic, and then forge ahead to find something you have not seen before. In Venice that January, I saw my experience unfold in layers, watched myself emerge out of the gray backdrop in full relief. A small female figure in front of a shoe store that featured sequined blue high heels, a shop of glossy, colorful masks, or even simply standing to watch a lone pigeon amble along the canal. A series of fully developed photographs became realized in my mind. Observer and observed, right there. It all seemed black and white that January, despite the brilliant glittering glass in the shops around San Marco, or the boldly colored Missoni sweaters on skinny mannequins. The food was black and white, too. Dark squid ink pasta, creamy risotto, pale white wine, and snowy bacala, that tangy salt cod that spreads like butter over bread.
Thank you. Beautiful. There's such mood coming through that description of Venice in winter. I remember reading that passage and the solitariness of it. Really, I felt the solitariness. The mood was just coming off of the page, which I think is one of the hallmarks of excellent writing, when the reader is transported into an experience like that. So,
thank you.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I wanted to make sure we talk about a few things here, love and death being one of them. These are major themes in your work. You explore love and death, and you give us intimate examples, your mother, your grandmother, your husband, communal examples, feeling at one with strangers while traveling, also nature, falling in love with elephants. And you do the same for death. There are portraits of intimate death, your mother and your grandmother, also distant or seemingly impersonal death, like visiting the killing fields in Cambodia. And really, there were several places we could talk about. And then you also witnessed an elephant who had died. It's a powerful scene. The herd of elephants are standing around mourning this matriarch who has died, while the hyenas and the vultures are there starting to clean up her death. And such important themes. What compelled you to explore these two issues? And what was your approach? I don't want to put words in your mouth or describe it for you, so let me just leave it open-ended.
Well, I mean, aren't these the big themes of life? I mean, I've been asked about the death thing by other people as well. And I spent 10 years, which wasn't, was included in my bio, but should have been. I worked with tending the dying for 10 years as a volunteer. I, as a child, I was very frightened of death, and then I became more curious about it. And being with my grandmother before she died made me realize that there was this kind of unfolding of the way things are, that this is the way things are, and that people do die. I think the death stuff has a lot to do with the loss and the sort of experiencing of loss and what that says about the love that is also connected with that person. But then there are the scenes like in Bhutan where I went to the cremation and I watched the woman's body in the little structure being burned, and I was like hypnotized with fascination and emotion. I felt like I had been invited to come there as a person from far, far away, and it was the most extraordinary event. I've always I've wanted to have death demystified for me, for my own self, and so the talking about the instances of death was, it was just necessary. I mean, there's a lot of loss in our lives, and there's all different kinds of loss. That. I mean, when you get a divorce, it's like a death. When your pet dies, it's a huge, can be a huge loss in your life. So I had really been at a loss, you could say, growing up. I had been unloved. I had been overlooked, and not regarded. And so what burned inside of me was, I wanted to be loved, and I wanted to figure out how to love myself. And I wanted to understand about death. I wanted to understand why. I mean, to understand that sort of truism, which is that everything you love you're going to lose everything you love.
Right.
And you're going to lose your own life. And so the death of my mother was very important for me to write about, because it was a point at which I somehow thought I was going to be freed of my pain with her, which actually wasn't the case. It took me years after that for that. But I really had that need to go be at her bedside, and I couldn't get there, and all the rest of it. So because I knew that if I had gone to her bedside, I would have told her I loved her. I would have told her that despite everything, that love was still present inside me.
Right.
And that I believed it was present inside her. We need to believe in love. We need to believe in it. And I had the affirmation of love with my grandmother, of course. And I had the affirmation of love with my best friend, this girl I knew from 4 years old. So the love, what I didn't understand was the love of self. That was the thing that took me quite a long time to discover. But I wanted to contrast the two deaths of my grandmother and my mother. And then to include that thing in Bhutan, and even the reflections on the killing fields in Cambodia. My mother used to like, and I mentioned this, she used to like to go to cemeteries and walk through cemeteries. And she and I did that when we first lived in Italy. And I wondered all the time why she was so interested in going to cemeteries and looking at these gravestones and so on. But I inherited that interest. I loved doing that, as witnessed by the scene where I traipse around Père Lachaise in Paris with my daughter and grandchildren. We could have cared less about going to the cemetery, the graveyard. So I don't know. It's part of meeting life, meeting what life has to deliver to you, and it delivers death. It does. It does. Yeah, and then you honor, if you can write about this really carefully and mindfully, you're honoring the person that you're writing about.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
I really think that that's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. When I first was making some notes for our call, I had love and started making some notes, and then I had death and started making some notes, and I saw the parallels there and thought, oh no, this is, I mean, two themes, but they are so wedded. Do you think we could understand love without understanding death, and vice versa? Do we need to put them together to gain some kind of wholeness to our perspective?
I think that love becomes all the more precious and powerful when you know you could lose it.
Mm-hmm.
You know that the key, one of the key Buddhist truths is that everything is impermanent. If you have a really true a true understanding of this, then that's what fills out love and fills out your heart. It's like, okay, so if you have this impermanence and you have this sense of don't take anything for granted here,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like offer love, risk it, offer love, you know, be ready to receive it, whatever. And because you don't know, you don't know if it will flourish, if it won't. You don't know if a person will choose to live, or like in the case of my mother, will choose to live or not live, choose
Mm-hmm.
not to live. And then you have the contrast between a woman who chooses to not live versus my grandmother who lived to be 89. And you know, it was just such a incredible contrast.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the love is made, expanded, and it's enriched, and it's, yeah, I mean, I've often believed that you don't appreciate the dark without the light. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you and there's something to appreciate about the dark, and there is something to appreciate about the light. And going
Right.
back to the classics again, one of the key lessons in the Odyssey was that Odysseus had to go to the underworld, and he had to meet with these departed souls, and he had to
Mm-hmm.
listen to them speak, because he had to be reminded that he was not immortal and that he was going to
Right.
die. I mean, that was the, you know, major, and in a lot of the classical epics, that is a journey that the hero takes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's there's, and then, you know, in the animal world, the death thing is so, it makes you just see the magnificence of the simplicity of how animals survive. You know, I mean, animals
Mm-hmm.
don't need much more than, you know, uh, food and water,
Right.
you know, and their lives are defined and driven by that. And the elephant family, of course, does the protecting of the young. But there's that group consciousness when the matriarch dies, and everybody gathers round.
Mm-hmm.
And there's I don't know of any other animal hurt communities or whatever that do that. But the elephant,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's extraordinary. And to witness that was just like, I mean, it's emblazoned. I remember everything about that scene,
Mm.
and that experience. Very moving, and it makes you realize how fragile, in a way, life is, because again, there's that sense of impermanence. You know, if there's droughts,
Right.
you know, if there's horrible droughts, the animals will die.
Mm-hmm.
If animals get injured and can't be protected, they will die. And
Yes.
and so, but they don't happily have to think about that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we humans, the delights of thinking about that, these weighty matters, and then we get to be witness to that unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, the being with the dying is probably one of the most important, you know, little periods of my life, you know, in terms of wisdom and kind of an increased sort of understanding of sort of the meaning of life, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And you do bear witness to it beautifully. The description of the funeral pyre in Bhutan was quite moving. Um, not grotesque and not sentimental. It just had this descriptive quality that was balanced and showed me the scene, and it felt honest, and like I could decide if I wanted to have an emotional response to it. You weren't manipulating the reader with your prose in any way, so there was well, maybe I should read it for our listeners, but you mention some beautiful colors, and you also mention a rather nasty smell. So it felt like honesty, like you aren't shying away from either aspect of this. And if you don't mind, I'll just read the paragraph because I have it right here. It's beautiful, I replied. Yes, the whole show was beautiful. The mass of swirling blue, yellow, and gray flame, and her tiny fragment of a face dancing there, coming in and out of focus. After first recoiling when her head was struck, I settled into watching the ephemeral melting away of her countenance. I remember thinking it was taking a long time to disappear, and this seemed somehow fitting. The work of coming into life and then departing from it may be life's greatest mystery, and a body on fire takes its own time to dissolve into dust. From time to time, I caught a rank odor, like the burning of rotten meat, greasy and sour, and then it floated away, as once again I inhaled the dreamy, burning wood smoke. And there's a moment, I believe it comes after this, where you mention that in the West we put on black clothing and we try not to cry. And, our rituals around death are very stoic, very buttoned up, and you take your 3 days to arrange a funeral and then you get back to the office or whatever, which
Right.
is in such stark contrast to what you saw in Bhutan. And there was a funeral scaffolding on the Ganges River that you describe as well. And I can imagine some people kind of recoiling from that description, but I appreciated being shown the truth of what these people do around death, and having the curtain pulled back, being of this culture and
Right.
the black suit
Thank you. No,
experience.
I mean, the gifts of going to places like Bhutan and to India, where everything is it's out in the open. This is part of life. I mean, these rituals are part of life. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's not a separation. You don't put somebody in a box, you
Right.
put makeup on them,
Yes.
inject them with all kinds of chemicals, put makeup on them, put them in a box, and then bury them in the ground. No,
Mm-hmm.
you put them on a pyre and you light it on fire, or in certain countries in Tibet, they put
Mm-hmm.
people on the top of mountains and they let them just go that way. I mean,
Right.
so let the birds of prey come and I mean, so this is how the death and the life thing are inexorably intertwined. I mean, they're just
Mm-hmm.
like they're so and we in this culture, we try to compartmentalize everything. It
Right.
doesn't make any sense to me. Never did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yes, I agree. Well, the last topic I wanted us to talk about was writing or art, but especially writing as a spiritual practice. You mentioned art as a spiritual pursuit several times. You say the human drive to create beauty in order to survive life's challenges. Okay, that's a fragment of a sentence, but you
yeah.
reference the human drive. That's my fragment, by the way, not Meg's. You say great artists are spiritual practitioners who forever question their relation to the universe and the divine. And art is a spiritual practice. I understand this now. So let's go there, art is a spiritual practice, and maybe your evolution of understanding that this is so.
You certainly don't ask sort of
Lightweight questions.
squicky questions. So when I think about the art as a spiritual practice, I know where I said that back in the book, and how much I've thought about the people that made those mosaics in the Byzantine churches, and this was in the Venice chapter. But I have looked at so much art, and I have looked at the devotion that's in art. And I've thought about musicians who have worked all their lives playing music, and expressing themselves, expressing their innermost being. And Monet, the artist Monet, who painted into his late 80s, when his eyes were going bad, and his sense of color was totally screwy. So there's something about this dedication, and there are writers that I know of that have spent their whole lives doing the same thing. And it's being true to this kind of this expression that is yours to give. So but it's constancy. That's what it is, because spiritual practice, what I've learned from doing the Buddhist thing for all these years, is that if you are not constant, if you are not practicing, in effect, then it's not then you're not a practitioner. You don't embody it, because you kind of play at it. So you give yourself to this activity, whether it's painting a painting, whether it's painting paintings, or making sculpture, or writing music, or playing music. It's being true to this thing and giving it yourself all the way, and believing in it. And it's like giving your gift to the world. My teacher at SWRT, Jack Cornfield, he says this thing over and over again to the students when they leave retreat. And he reminds them that they have gifts. He said, take your practice out into the world and give your gifts to the world, whatever they may be. That you don't have to, it's not that you have to be a musician or an artist or whatever. You might be somebody who does cooking, and you cook beautiful meals, and that's a practice in itself. And you do it with mindfulness, and you do it with care and love. It's you treat the activity with loving kindness and with attention. That's what the whole thing is about. And it's being, and like I say, it's being constant and kind of always with it. So I feel that with me, writing has not always been a practice. It's been, it certainly has been since I wrote the book, and I've been now reminded of how important writing is to my sort of sense of well-being and sense of who I am. And I think it is a gift I give the world. And so I have I'm renewing my sort of dedication to it,
Yes.
But I have played the piano since I was 8 years old, and that I consider another practice. And, every piece of art I look at, I tend to think about the relationship of that piece of art with the person who made it, and what was going on, and what was being given, and what was being offered, and what's being said.
Yes.
It could be just expression of joy. It could be expression of some truths, in words, with the writer. But it also just could be an expression of joy or expression of love. The art in Italy, the religious art in Italy, sometimes you look at those paintings and you see the love that's in them. you see the devotion that's in beyond the beautiful paint and beyond the, you know, the themes that are all constant. But there's something in there that some of those artists have invested their whole heart in that work of art.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, the approach that one brings to the practice, the care, the love, the mindfulness, and the way the practice of making your art, of writing, is part of your sense of well-being. I relate to and appreciate everything that you said here. And there are times when my practice wanes and times when it waxes, and I always miss it when it's waning, you know, when life gets in the way of
Sure.
of art and creativity. Yeah, I don't want to add to anything you said. I think it's just perfect. So I was taking notes for myself and thinking, all right, this is going to go on the sign that I tape on the wall, you know, so I see it every day about, yeah, my well-being. And that's, you know, that is something I have been aware of for all of my life. And yet it still can be difficult to maintain as a practice.
Of course.
Right. So we all need to be reminded. And I think conversations like this are so affirming, because it can be lonely to be a creative person creating in your bubble, and maybe your immediate people aren't appreciative of it. So we have to reach outside of our immediate household or immediate community to connect with people who share that perspective on making art. So
right. Well, it's all about, yeah, I mean, it's about doing it alone, but it's also, the Buddhists believe in community and they call it Sangha. I mean, people who are devoted to their creative lives also have to find community around to nurture them, and I think that's very important, you know, whether it's artist groups that work together or musicians that get together to play or whatever they do, because that affirms, that gives affirmation to the work.
Yes.
When it's hard for you, the individual, to do it, you know, 24 hours a day, you know, when it's I was thinking of teaching as a practice too, because that's another thing I've done,
yes.
and something that I loved dearly and I felt very, very, very connected to and very passionate about. So that's another, I mean, I see teaching as very creative and generous activity, you know, that you could call a practice.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we have many opportunities to do these, to make our offerings, you know,
right.
Make ourselves, put our presence out there into the world. You know, the Dalai Lama said that changing the world doesn't work unless you work on changing yourself, or, you know, let you work on your own, you know, health and well-being, and your own and your own loving heart, and that's so true. And then you can offer that, if you are, you know, you offer that to the world, and it does make a difference.
Yes.
If you have those more and more people who are doing that. But it's hard work. We all know that. It's a lot of work, and you have to contend with the doubt and the anxiety and the things that come in, and
yes, yeah, and the myriad responsibilities that get in the way of making art. But
yeah.
Yes, well, we have this community at Storyworks Roundtable, and please join us anytime you want to sit around and chat about craft. I know Robert and Catherine would love to have you join us, and you offer community to all the writers out there with your writers coming together
Yeah.
show.
Well, I'd love to
Yes.
come back and talk to you all. That would be fun. Yeah.
Good, good. Yeah, we would enjoy that definitely anytime. So tell everyone where they can find you. And of course, we'll put links in our show notes as well.
Right. Okay. The website is magdimond.com, and that's Diamond spelled Dimond. And I do show up on Elephant Journal, which is a really interesting online journal. And I'm on Facebook Live now every Thursday at 1:30 Pacific time, and it's facebook.com/travels with Mag. That's the page that you go to at 1:30 Pacific time. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. I'm getting a lot of different guests writing in different ways, and I'm convinced that writers are just crazily in love with talking about books and writing. So,
aren't we?
Yeah,
Yes.
right, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you again for talking about your journey and sharing your wisdom with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. This has been a great conversation. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworks.com.